We turn right to business. Kate Moody joins us. The war in Ukraine has provoked a massive humanitarian and economic crisis, and the International Monetary Fund says it will leave lasting scars on the regional and global economies. Kate.
Mark, the IMF has this week unblocked $1.4 billion in emergency financial aid for Kyiv. It says it is ready to help neighboring countries as well with further assistance as required. Russia is set to enter a deep recession as a result of these unprecedented Western sanctions against it. But the crisis will also throw the global economic recovery off course. I've been speaking to the IMF's first deputy managing director, Gita Gopinath.
It was unthinkable that there would be such a war in the 21st century in Europe. And so in that sense, it is a watershed moment. I would say that there will be lasting consequences of this for the global economy. I mean, quite simply, if you look at the energy sector and energy trade, it's already clear that that will look very different in the post-war landscape. Countries will diversify away from Russia. You know, there's a push towards more renewables, so things will change on the trade front there. The second, for instance, was on payment systems. I think after the sanctions and so on, you could see big shifts in the payment systems. You could see an acceleration, for instance, of digital currencies, CBDCs. So there is a lot going on. And the concern that you might be held hostage to exports from another country, I think is a major concern that's coming out of this crisis.
You can watch that interview in full at 11:15 Paris time or on the France 24 website. Let's check in on the day's trading action now. After some very choppy trading, we've seen Wall Street closing in the red, just losses of between about a third of a percentage point on the Dow Jones and S&P 500, nearly 1% for the NASDAQ. Oil prices did drop slightly, although they've stabilized after Wednesday's biggest one-day slump in nearly 2 years. The major European indices closed sharply lower, losses of nearly 3% in each Paris and Frankfurt, a bit less in London there. Well, the European Central Bank did surprise markets and investors by vastly picking up the pace at which it's winding down its pandemic stimulus program. The ECB is trying to fight the highest inflation on record. It raised its forecast for this year from 3.2 to 5.4%. That's partly because of higher energy prices and other supply chain disruptions linked to the war in Ukraine. The ECB president, Christine Lagarde, described it as a watershed moment for Europe. She said it would have a material impact on economic growth. Take a listen.
The risks to the economic outlook have increased substantially with the Russian invasion of Ukraine and are tilted to the downside. While risks relating to the pandemic have declined, the war in Ukraine may have a stronger effect on economic sentiment and could worsen supply-side constraints again.
The U.S. Federal Reserve will be facing similar challenges when it meets next week. Inflation in the U.S. hitting a new 40-year high of 7.9% in February. Unlike the ECB, the American Central Bank is expected to raise interest rates for the first time since the start of the pandemic next week. Well, that uncertainty has fueled comparisons to the 1973 energy shock when oil-producing countries embargoed exports to the U.S. and its allies over their support of Israel. The crisis led to high inflation and recession in many countries. French Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire has warned there are more than a few parallels. Emerald Maxwell reports.
Are we about to relive the 1970s energy crisis, when a distant war provoked an out-of-control spike in prices? For the French government, the comparison isn't so far-fetched.
It's not an exaggeration to say that this energy crisis, the energy shock of 2022, is similar in intensity and brutality to the 1973 oil shock.
In 1973, in response to the Yom Kippur War, OPEC drastically cut oil production, which made prices soar by around 300% in 4 months, the same proportion as natural gas today. The French economy suffered, inflation soared, while growth tanked. With energy prices skyrocketing, the French were forced to make savings, from driving to heating and lighting their homes.
We have gone from an era where we could consume as much as we wanted to one where we have to be as careful as possible about our consumption.
It led to a ban on lighting shop windows at night and an end to television broadcasts after 11 p.m. The government also reintroduced daylight saving time and brought in speed limits for vehicles. energy consumption fell by 14%. Experts say there could be lessons for today.
Our first and least costly response is actually to practice restraint when it comes to energy, which means, for instance, switching off lights at night in shop windows and offices, turning down the heating, starting in public buildings and encouraging people to do so at home too.
The French Finance Ministry is hoping the comparison will shock the French into action and help accelerate the green transition.
Well, more big global companies have announced plans to cut ties with Russia. Goldman Sachs has become the first Wall Street bank since the start of the invasion to say it will close operations there. Last year, before the Ukraine crisis, Citigroup began winding down its Russian divisions. The brewer Carlsberg, meanwhile, also joined its rival Heineken in announcing that it would stop production and sales of all beer in Russia. It is the majority owner of Russia-based Baltika breweries, which the company said would continue to operate as a separate business. The Danish group says any profits generated from that business, though, will be donated to relief organizations. Mark, that's all the business news for now.
Kate, as ever, thank you very much indeed. Great to see you, Kate Moody, there with all the business. Thank you.